Well, can I start this book launch and seminar? Welcome you to it. I'm Stephen Hayes, the Director of GPI. I know we've more people to come than are coming in the back. But before, I'm going to hand the chair for this evening over to Robert a little later on, and we'll introduce him. But our first speaker is the Member of Parliament for this particular constituency, Cities of London and Westminster, and I want to welcome here really. He'll be leaving early because he has a vote, unfortunately, but very nice of you, good of you to come. You're an essayist in this book, and we look forward to your remarks. And after you've given your remarks, we'll take questions to you in your absence, and I'll translate them. Right. Mark Field.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed, and many apologies that I do have to dash off. We've got a vote at 6 o'clock. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Global Policy Institute. It's a very auspicious moment, I think, and this particular book in particular, ignoring my own chapter, but the other chapters are far more worthy. And dare I say, with all the travails of the London Metropolitan University, it's probably some real value that the Global Policy Institute can add to these issues of financial crisis. I wanted to just say a few words about how I think things might pan out with an unashamedly political element to it, if I may. I think collectively our nation was lulled into a false sense of security by the clement economic conditions that prevailed for a decade or more from the mid-1990s, alongside perhaps a delusional sense that the good times would be here forever. In this sense, at least, the government has been in tune with public sentiment. There is almost a primeval human urge to avoid confronting the unpalatable in the hope that today's problems will simply fix themselves. Something will turn up, the watchword of the cheerily optimistic and the insanely reckless alike. Now, one of the underlying characteristics of the deep financial and debt crisis in which we find ourselves is that the continuing state of denial. Now, part of this, I think, is understandable. For 2 years, there has been a grim daily diet of news about the financial crisis, which has not, at least until other than for those who've lost their jobs, not been matched by any sense of financial sacrifice. This continues to be the case as the government pumps more money into the economy, but I fear that the time of reckoning will soon be upon us. I think too few of my parliamentary colleagues have woken up to the enormity of the debt crisis that will follow hot on the heels from the economic downturn. Yet the seriousness of what is still to be there cannot be long denied. For sure, technically the worst of the economic recession may now be behind us, although I believe it's also premature to conclude that a double-dip recession is not on the cards as the effect of the continued stimulus dies off, probably just after the time of the next general election. Amidst some of the recent glib green shoots commentary, I think we should also understand that this banking crisis represented nothing unusual. Indeed, it signalled the end of another in a very long line of boom and busts, positively commonplace in the second half of the last century, caused by speculative euphoria and an excess of credit. It is, I believe, in the government's narrow interest to present this as being an entirely unprecedented type of downturn caused by modern financial alchemy gone wrong, by the failure amongst regulators, or rank unforeseen misfortune. This is not so. It is true that the global nature of the economic crisis has made things worse, but I think there are also clear lessons from the past. One of the grand old names of British banking, Barings, collapsed owing £780 million, slightly less than 15 years ago. Today, RBS survives courtesy of a £45.5 billion bailout. But it is only the extent of the economic downturn, not its cause, that is so very different. Arguably, it is a credit debt bubble, along with China's aggressive desire to build market share in global trade, rather than inadequate regulation, that have been the primary cause of the economic calamity that has beset the global monetary system. As a result, in my view, the solutions do not, whatever government may tell us, require a bewildering racking up of unimaginable levels of debt for future generations of taxpayers. Indeed, nothing in my view will hinder our prospects of rapid economic recovery and a sustainable return to improved living standards. I believe the biggest threat in the years ahead is that the indiscriminate pumping of money by the Bank of England into the economy will bring with it an unsustainable combination of inflation, rising unemployment, weak growth, and diminished competitiveness. This will provide that toxic mix of stagflation, truly back to the 1970s phenomenon. The worst case scenario here is that any future government, I'm not making any narrow political point here, but any future government may regard a sustained dose of inflation as the quickest and most politically expedient way of helping to bring down the level of public debt. Moreover, inflation of course also provides a very convenient route to enhancing the tax take as fiscal drag is allowed to run its course. The inflationary pressures brought about by the fiscal stimulus and quantitative easing may in any event make this path particularly difficult to avoid in the years to come. In truth, any UK government that is regarded as popular in 2011 or 2012 is probably not administering the right economic medicine. To do the right thing on tax and public expenditure in the years to come will not be a politically easy option. The billions being borrowed now by the government to ease the impact of the downturn for today's electors will rapidly be repaid by future generations in the form of higher spending, higher inflation, and reduced living standards. Yet the true cost of all this, I don't think, will become apparent for some months to come. The government, I think, is desperately hoping that the sands of time do not run out before it has to face the voters, which makes the talk of economic recovery so very dangerous. Contrary to somewhat fatuous claims we've seen, it's not a simple binary issue between Tory cuts on the one hand and Labour investment on the other. There is going to be a very hard slog ahead for any UK political administration. In essence, I think one of the issues that we face with my own Conservative Party riding relatively high in the opinion polls is that the bond and currency markets have been calmed into quiet confidence about the nation's economic prospects as we look beyond a general election. For it is certainly not some miraculous solving of the dire public finances that has soothed the markets over the past few months. Indeed, the IMF has calculated that over the course of the next decade, the UK government should ideally impose a fiscal tightening of some 12.8%, simply to restore the national debt to its pre-crisis levels, an option considered by most so extreme that it would prove politically impossible to put in place. Now, the more recent prospect of a hung parliament and further delay to the required radical decision-making pending potentially a second election during the course of next year, risks, in my view, tipping sterling and the gilts market into a catastrophic state. Nothing, in my view, would be more damaging to our economic outlook than for a layer of political uncertainty to be added to what is already an economically very uncertain position. The markets have factored in firm action in the near future, and they risk being tipped over the edge if further delays result from an inconclusive election result. Just imagine the unseemly horse trading that could result from a hung parliament simply to form a sustainable government. In the absence of firm political decision-making about expenditure or tax, market activity would certainly fill the void. The currency and bond markets would probably turn sour. There's a substantial risk of a sterling crisis. Long-term interest rates would soar, and the nation's essential AAA gilt credit rating might even face a downgrade. If political leaders, concerned only in gaining tactical advantage, showed themselves unwilling to face up to the stark facts of this long march back to fiscal balance and economic recovery, it could even prove necessary to call in the IMF. A political class unwilling and unable, perhaps, to take responsibility or court on popularity may in this way be forced to bring in a neutral umpire to administer the very tough decisions on public spending. So how really to bring about this decisive leadership on the economy that I do believe the country so desperately needs? Now, opposition parties have spent the last few months systematically discrediting the government's record for economic management, and it's been an unqualified success. My own party in particular have been upfront about the collective task that lies ahead, and we've made some difficult statements about the need to pare back public spending. But I think there remains a fundamental disconnect with the general public, as well as a lingering sense of fear that could well prove the difference between a working majority on the one hand and a hung parliament to which I've just referred. I think that any party aspiring to govern now requires a sweeping, positive, uplifting vision to counteract the rather dismal deficit of aspiration in today's Britain. From now on, politicians will need to promote a consistent and well-articulated case for economic growth. The truth is that rapid action to correct the deficit is going to be the quickest route to the promotion of growth and recovery. A well-thought-out timetable to sort out the public finances will boost the confidence and, as all international evidence from the past shows, promote more rapid growth. Note too that nothing will choke future growth more conclusively than sustained tax rises. Cuts in public expenditure, rather than additional taxes, especially those on income, are more likely to result in economic expansion. Let me just say this, if I may, in conclusion. I'm sorry I have to dash off, but Stephen has already told me he will pass on the questions and the criticisms as well, I'm sure. And I've got people like Stuart Fraser here from the City Corporation who no doubt would do likewise. But I think it is actually crucial that politicians have to articulate the sense of excitement as to the challenges ahead. For sure, the public does need to have an idea of the scale of the challenges and problems that we have, but also a taste for some of its solutions. I think it falls to, hopefully, colleagues across the House of Commons to give our fellow Britons something now firmly to believe in. Thank you.